No one at the sanctuary believed Elias Monroe would survive when he stepped into the restricted zone, alone, unarmed, face to face with a lion that had once nearly killed a man. A retired engineer walking calmly toward a wild animal, screaming in pain. Staff shouted for him to stop, convinced he was walking to his death. But seconds later, the lion didn't strike. It bowed its head, touched his hand, and did something no one had ever witnessed before. From that moment, the world began to wonder, could a predator understand compassion? The dusty wind whispered low across the Namibian scrubland as Elias Monroe stepped out of the rattling jeep. His gait was deliberate, weathered boots pressing down into the dry soil as if trying to anchor him to the present. He stood a few feet away from the entrance gate of Kosemba Wildlife Sanctuary, a place he had only read about in sparse online articles and a single feature in National Geographic. The brochures had promised the usual: responsible conservation, wildlife photography tours, and ethical rehabilitation programs. But none of that interested Elias. What drew him here was a name scribbled in black ink on the back of a fading photo, a name his son had written years ago under the picture of a young lion with a crooked paw taken from a tourist flyer. The boy, Matthew, had once dreamed of becoming a wildlife vet. That dream had vanished in an instant. A lab explosion, a faulty relay, a fire. The loss still gripped Elias in a silent, paralyzing way that no therapy or digital grief support for him could fix. Mr. Monroe, a young woman in a Green Ranger uniform, called out, walking toward him. "You're here for the afternoon tour, right? I'm Lindywe. I'll be your guide today." Elias nodded stiffly. "I won't be long," he said. Lindywe gave him a puzzled smile. "Most people want to stay as long as possible once they see the lions. I'm not most people." She didn't press further. As they moved through the sanctuary's inner trails in the open-top jeep, Elias listened half-heartedly to the guide's practiced lines about conservation challenges, poaching threats, and their solar-powered water systems. He gave the appropriate nods, but his eyes scanned the perimeter fencing, the holding enclosures, and the winding service paths that branched away from the main tour routes. The sanctuary wasn't as sanitized as the brochures made it seem. Barbed wire showed rust in places. Some signs had faded to illegibility, and there was a hum beneath the surface, something raw, unsettled. He noticed the staff glancing toward the northeastern quadrant of the preserve with a nervousness that wasn't in line with Lindywe's upbeat monologue. As they passed an empty shade structure near the veterinary center, Elias turned suddenly. A low guttural sound echoed from behind a cinder-block wall. Not the deep roar of a lion proclaiming territory, but something shorter, sharper, a sound laced with pain. "What's that?" he asked. Lindywe paused, her voice dipping involuntarily. "We don't go near that zone. It's the restricted compound." "Why?" "It's where we house aggressive rescues, temporarily. One of the lions there, his name's Dakar, was brought in from a collapsed private zoo last month. He hasn't acclimated, bit a handler during the first intake, almost mauled the vet." Elias turned his head toward the direction of the sound. "You're telling me he's been locked in isolation for a month?" "He's under medical and behavioral watch." Elias didn't reply. His fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his seat. The jeep pulled into a small break station where tourists were handed chilled water and offered a photo op with the less dangerous species, a pair of orphaned cheetah cubs that looked more annoyed than curious. While the group gathered around the feeding deck, Elias stepped away unnoticed, his movement casual but with purpose. He followed the dirt path toward the restricted compound, walking as if he belonged, past the loading area, past the maintenance shed, until he reached a chain-linked gate covered in a faded warning sign. "Authorized personnel only." There was no security guard, just a keypad lock which had been carelessly left unlatched. He stepped inside. The holding area was little more than a concrete enclosure with high steel mesh on two sides and an open roof. Inside, the lion paced. Its shoulders were wide and uneven, ribs faintly visible beneath the dust-caked coat. Blood crusted near its rear flank, where flies buzzed without fear. Its mane was ragged, as if pulled out in clumps, yet its eyes, amber and clear, locked onto Elias the moment he stepped into view. Dakar stopped pacing. They stood in silence, man and lion, a dozen feet apart. No barriers, no tranquilizers, no observers. Elias slowly crouched, the way he'd once crouched next to his son's childhood bed when night terrors wouldn't let the boy sleep. He lowered his body, not to threaten, but to yield, to listen. "I know what it feels like," Elias said, voice barely audible above the wind, "to be locked in with your own pain, to have people walk by you and pretend you're not screaming." Dakar's nostrils flared. Elias didn't move. The lion took one step forward, then another. His lips weren't curled, his tail didn't whip, his hackles didn't rise. He just approached, deliberate, slow, silent. When only a few feet remained, Dakar stopped. The air between them grew dense, and then, impossibly, the lion lowered his head and pressed it gently into Elias's open palm. For a split second, Elias stopped breathing. Behind him, from some high-angle security camera he hadn't noticed, a red light blinked to life. Elsewhere on the property, alarms began to sound. But in that moment, Elias wasn't thinking of lions or danger or death. He was thinking of Matthew, of a child who had once believed wild animals could understand kindness, of the photo in his pocket and the dream it had represented. Elias whispered, "You remembered." The lion made a soft, low sound, not a growl, almost a sigh. The sanctuary staff arrived within seconds, yelling, weapons drawn, shouting at him to get away, to drop to the ground, to freeze. But Elias stood slowly, never turning his back on the lion. He raised both hands as if surrendering to the calm itself, and Dakar simply stepped back, turned, and returned to the corner of his enclosure. Later, inside the security office, the director of operations slammed a fist onto the desk. "You could have been killed. What the hell were you thinking?" Elias didn't answer. It wasn't that he didn't have a response. It was just that the question was too small for the moment he had lived. Outside, beyond the walls of the sanctuary, word was already beginning to spread. Rosa Park, the freelance photographer who had arrived just that morning for a separate assignment, had seen it. She had seen everything, and she had recorded it. One man, one lion, one touch. The video would soon spark global headlines. Wildlife behaviorists, conservation nonprofits, animal cognition researchers, even insurance companies interested in sanctuary liability risk would take notice. Some would call it a fluke, others would call it madness. But to Elias Monroe, standing under the burnt orange sky of Namibia, the moment was none of those things. It was a beginning, a breath, a soft, stunned silence, and it would echo farther than anyone dared imagine. The footage lasted only 47 seconds. It began with a grainy wide shot from the compound's upper security camera, a man stepping through a gate marked "Restricted Access," walking straight toward an agitated lion inside a steel mesh enclosure. There was no hesitation in the man's stride, no sign of fear or uncertainty. He stopped at the edge of the pen, knelt, and extended a hand. The lion, initially pacing with visible agitation, paused, stared, and then approached, and just before the clip ended, the lion lowered its head into the man's palm. By the time Elias Monroe returned to his modest guest lodge that evening, the video had already found its way into the hands of Rosa Park. The freelance wildlife photographer had been staying on site to document endangered cheetahs, but after witnessing what happened through a zoom lens while testing a new camera, she made a choice. She uploaded the footage to her cloud drive, added one sentence in the file. Description: "This just happened. No tranquilizers, no tricks." And sent it to a private wildlife conservation Discord group she'd joined during the pandemic. By midnight, someone had posted it on Reddit. By morning, it had gone viral. Elias had no idea. He'd slept fitfully, awakened before sunrise by the throaty roar of some big cat further down the valley. At breakfast, he was met by silence. The lodge cook, usually friendly, avoided eye contact. Two junior rangers sitting nearby whispered, then fell silent when he walked past. Outside, the air buzzed with tension, not the dry heat of Namibia, but the unmistakable shift in atmosphere that came when bureaucracy collided with something it couldn't contain. At 8:15 a.m., he was summoned. Not asked, not invited. Summoned. The sanctuary's administration building wasn't much. A cinder-block rectangle with dust-covered solar panels and a row of outdated Dell monitors glowing dimly inside. The director of operations, a woman named Britta Vollen, motioned for him to sit without a word. Elias took the chair slowly. Across the room, a flat-screen TV showed a paused frame of the video. Him, kneeling, Dakar, inches away. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Britta asked, her accent clipped and sharp. "That animal is categorized as high risk. He was due for relocation to a secure reserve in South Africa next month. And you?" "I didn't plan it," Elias interrupted softly. "I didn't even know where I was going until I heard him." "Not the point," she snapped. "There are protocols, legal liability, insurance requirements. This sanctuary survives on international conservation grants and private donations. If you had been injured, or worse—" "I wasn't," Elias said. "He didn't hurt me." "That's not the standard we operate on," she said coldly. A moment of silence passed. Then Britta leaned forward. "You're to have no further contact with the animal. Your access is revoked. You'll be escorted off the property by the end of the day." Elias blinked. Not at the news. He'd expected as much. But at the cold finality of it. It reminded him of the email he'd received 2 years earlier from the lab board, after the accident that took his son. Different words, same tone. Final. Surgical. As if emotion was an error to be extracted. He rose, gave a slight nod, and walked out. What he didn't know was that the sanctuary wasn't as in control of the situation as it claimed. 2 hours later, Lisa Naboko, the facility's head veterinarian, stood outside Dakar's enclosure, frowning. The lion hadn't touched his food since the night before. The leftover carcass lay untouched, flies circling. The water trough had barely rippled. Dakar sat in the far corner, tail still, ears twitching every few seconds, as if listening for something distant. "He's not pacing anymore," Lisa murmured to her assistant, Juno, who stood beside her with a digital tablet. "But he's not eating, not drinking, not responding to stimulus." "What do you think it means?" Juno asked. Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she opened the app on her tablet and checked the vitals from the enclosure's sensor data. Respiration elevated. Pulse steady but irregular. No signs of aggression. No interest in food. No interaction with toys or enrichment materials. "He's waiting," she said at last, almost to herself. "For what?" Lisa's eyes narrowed. "I don't know." By late afternoon, the sanctuary's public relations inbox had received over 300 emails, mostly from conservationists, journalists, and amateur ethologists. Rosa's video had crossed 2 million views in 12 hours. The hashtags were trending. The Lion and the Man, Shanba Dakar Connection. Shaki, Cognition in the Wild. Twitter X exploded with debates ranging from animal cognition to AI pattern recognition software, mistakenly labeling the footage as trained behavior. But inside the sanctuary's walls, a different kind of debate was unfolding. Lisa confronted Britta in the admin office. "You can't just kick him out," she said. "You saw the footage. You've seen Dakar since. That lion is behaving in ways we don't understand." "Which is precisely why we can't allow civilians to interfere," Britta countered. "We need scientific controls, observations, structure." "You're trying to protect the sanctuary. I get it. But that man, whatever happened between him and Dakar, deserves to be studied, not silenced." Britta hesitated, then sighed. "Let's say I grant him one supervised observation window, from behind the glass, 10 minutes. Then he leaves. That's all." Lisa agreed, but she already knew it wouldn't be enough. The following morning, Elias returned, not to the compound, but to the medical observation unit adjacent to Dakar's enclosure. A reinforced one-way mirror had been installed hastily the night before, allowing observation without direct visual cues for the animal. Elias stood behind the glass, hands folded. Dakar sat motionless on the other side. And then, slowly, deliberately, the lion rose, walked to the far side of the pen, turned, and approached the glass. Elias held his breath. Dakar stared directly at him. "It's a one-way mirror," Lisa whispered beside Elias. "He shouldn't know you're here." "He knows," Elias said softly. The lion lowered his head, pressing his brow gently against the transparent barrier. Then he lay down. Lisa stepped back, stunned. "Animals don't reason like that," she murmured. "At least, they're not supposed to." Elias turned to her. "Maybe we've underestimated what grief looks like in something that doesn't speak our language." That evening, Rosa released a second clip, a silent video of Dakar pressing his head against the barrier. The only caption read, "He waited." This time, the footage reached beyond wildlife circles, psychology forums, human-animal interaction studies. Even real estate and health insurance blogs picked it up, paralleling the event to unexpected empathy in systems that normally prioritize risk over connection. Some advertisers quietly approached Rosa to license the footage. Others asked to sponsor upcoming interviews. Topics ranged from ethical AI and behavioral analytics to emotional intelligence in trauma response. One insurance company even floated the idea of using the story in a campaign about human-first risk modeling. Meanwhile, back in the sanctuary, Dakar still hadn't eaten, and Elias, now confined to observation status, found himself drawn into something deeper than a viral moment. He had come to Namibia to lose himself, but something was waiting for him here. Not closure, connection. Grief has a way of reorganizing time. For Elias Monroe, the past did not sit neatly behind him. It surfaced without warning, slipping into the present like a shadow that refused to detach. As he stood behind the reinforced observation glass, watching Dakar lie motionless on the concrete floor, his mind drifted back to a different room, in a different country, filled with a different kind of silence. 3 years earlier, Elias had been the chief systems engineer at a private robotics firm in Northern California, a company whose contracts spanned from autonomous logistics to advanced AI analytics for healthcare infrastructure. It was the kind of work investors loved: high-margin, data-driven, protected by layers of cloud security and legal compliance. The kind of company that advertised stability, future-proof innovation, and long-term insurance-backed risk management. That morning, his son Matthew had insisted on coming to the lab. He had begged, actually. Matthew was 16, bright, curious, endlessly fascinated by animals and machines in equal measure. He believed technology should serve life, not replace it. While Elias built predictive models and sensor arrays, Matthew filled notebooks with sketches of lions, wolves, and birds, always annotating them with imagined thoughts. "What if they remember us the way we remember them?" he once asked. Elias had smiled then, distracted, already late for a meeting. The explosion came from a test chamber 2 floors below, an electrical surge caused by a misrouted power relay during a prototype stress test. The investigation later concluded that no single person was at fault. The company's legal team settled quickly. Insurance covered the damages. The board released a carefully worded statement emphasizing safety protocols and compliance standards. None of it mattered. Matthew was gone. The house afterward became unbearable. Silence pressed against Elias from every corner. He stopped sleeping, stopped taking calls. Eventually, he resigned, not in protest, but in surrender. He sold the house, closed his retirement accounts, and walked away from an industry that suddenly felt hollow. All the optimization in the world had not prevented the one loss that mattered. Now, standing in a wildlife sanctuary half a world away, Elias felt the same ache stirring, only this time it was mirrored back at him through amber eyes. Dakar shifted slightly, his tail brushing the concrete once before settling again. His breathing was slow, controlled, but his gaze remained fixed on the one-way glass, as if distance meant nothing. Lisa Naboko stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly. She had spent her career studying animal physiology, behavior patterns, stress responses, everything measurable. She believed in data, in peer-reviewed research, in careful interpretation. Yet what she was seeing defied the frameworks she trusted. "He hasn't eaten in 48 hours, she said quietly. "Medically, he should be deteriorating faster. But he isn't. It's like his body is waiting." Elias nodded, eyes still on the lion. "So is mine." Lisa looked at him, then away. "The administration thinks this is a liability nightmare. They're worried about donor confidence, international oversight, even long-term funding agreements. Wildlife conservation is expensive. One lawsuit could shut this place down." "I understand risk," Elias replied. "I built my life around calculating it." "And yet you walked into that enclosure?" "Yes," he said simply, "because sometimes the cost of doing nothing is higher." Later that afternoon, Rosa Park sat alone in her temporary workspace, reviewing the footage, frame by frame. She had photographed war zones, illegal trafficking operations, and disaster aftermaths. She knew how images could be weaponized, how narratives could be twisted for clicks, ad revenue, and high-paying sponsorship deals. Already, she'd received emails from media agencies offering lucrative licensing contracts, brand partnerships, even pitches tied to mental health services and trauma counseling platforms eager to associate themselves with unexpected healing stories. She ignored them. Instead, she uploaded a longer cut of the video, uncut, unfiltered, with ambient sound intact. No dramatic music, no narration, just the truth as it unfolded. Within hours, the response shifted. Comments slowed, the tone changed. Older viewers, veterans, parents, retirees, shared stories of loss, of moments when connection had come from the least expected places. Behavioral scientists weighed in cautiously. Ethicists debated boundaries. Even professionals from unrelated sectors, real estate risk analysts, healthcare administrators, corporate insurance consultants, drew parallels between Dakar's behavior and unresolved trauma in human systems. One comment, buried among thousands, caught Rosa's attention. "This isn't about a lion recognizing a man. It's about two beings who were abandoned by the systems meant to protect them." That evening, Elias received a message slipped under his lodge door. A printed still image from the video. Him kneeling, Dakar approaching. On the back, in careful handwriting, Rosa had written a single line. "People are starting to listen." But the sanctuary is panicking. The next morning, a convoy of vehicles arrived unannounced. 2 representatives from the Regional Wildlife Authority, a legal advisor specializing in conservation compliance, and a man Elias hadn't expected to see, Dr. Alejandro Marquez, a renowned behavioral ecologist whose work on large predator cognition had challenged academic norms for over a decade. Marquez watched the footage in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to Lisa. "If this is authentic, and I believe it is, we are looking at something rare, not domestication, not conditioning. Recognition." "Recognition of what?" Britta asked sharply. "Intent," Marquez replied, "and possibly shared emotional states." The room fell quiet. Outside, Dakar finally rose and approached the feeding platform. For the first time in days, he lowered his head toward the food, then paused. His eyes flicked toward the observation wing, toward Elias. Elias felt his chest tighten. The lion did not eat. Not yet. Instead, Dakar sat down and waited. And for the first time since the accident that had shattered his life, Elias understood something with startling clarity. This was not a coincidence, not a viral anomaly, not a fleeting moment of internet fascination. This was a question, one that could no longer be ignored. As the sun dipped low over the sanctuary, casting long shadows across the enclosures, Elias knew the next decision would change everything, not just for him, but for the people now watching from across the world. He did not yet know what form that decision would take, but it was coming, and the world was holding its breath. The meeting was held in the only building on the sanctuary grounds with functioning air conditioning, a privilege reserved for official use and emergencies. That morning, it was both. Elias stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, shoulders still stiff from a night spent in restless half-sleep. The air was cool but heavy, thick with expectation and tension. Across from him sat Britta Vollen, flanked by 2 representatives from the Namibian Wildlife Governance Council, a lawyer with a nervous pen habit, and Lisa, who looked tired but focused. Marquez was at the far end, quietly flipping through a binder filled with printed screenshots and behavioral logs of Dakar from the past 10 days. No one was speaking. Then Rosa entered. She wasn't supposed to be there. This was a closed meeting, at least on paper. But Rosa walked in holding her press ID with one hand and her tablet in the other. She said nothing, made no eye contact, simply plugged her device into the screen system and tapped twice. A still image appeared. Dakar, standing at the glass, his head gently pressed against the panel. Behind the glass, Elias, unmoving, both palms raised, not in fear, but in greeting. Then Rosa spoke. "I was going to keep this under embargo until I finalized publication rights, but I changed my mind last night. There are some moments that don't belong to agencies or algorithms. They belong to people, to memory, and sometimes to change." Britta scowled. "This is not the time or place?" "Yes," Rosa cut her off. "It is, because while we debate policy and funding models, a lion is refusing to eat unless the man he chose to trust is present. That's not PR. That's reality." Dr. Marquez leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We are approaching a crossroads, not just for this sanctuary, but for how we view sentience in apex predators." The lawyer cleared his throat. "With all due respect, are we not projecting?" "No," Lisa said. "We're observing. Behavior precedes language, and Dakar has made his needs perfectly clear." Britta turned toward Elias. "And what exactly would you propose? That we let a man with no zoological training enter the enclosure again? That we abandon protocols? Insurance won't cover that. Our international sponsors will withdraw." Elias's voice was calm but firm. "Then don't let me in. Let me be near, visible. Let him see I haven't disappeared like everyone else did." "And then what?" Britta asked. "Then we learn," he said. "We observe. We do what conservation was always supposed to do. Listen." By mid-afternoon, a compromise was reached. Elias would be granted supervised observation rights from a reinforced, see-through barrier, no glass but heavy-gauge steel mesh. Dakar would be allowed visual contact, nothing more. The session would be monitored by Lisa, Marquez, and a tranquilizer team stationed off-camera. Rosa would record everything for scientific and public documentation, provided she respected a blackout period for editorial publishing. When Elias stepped into the open viewing corridor later that day, the sun was high and the compound was quiet. Staff stood at a distance. Cameras hummed. Lisa's voice came through the earpiece. "We're live. Proceed slowly." Elias moved toward the barrier. Across the compound, Dakar lay still, head resting on crossed paws, his body language unreadable. For a moment, Elias feared the lion had detached, that the connection had evaporated under the pressure of interruption and time. Then Dakar stirred. First the tail, then the ears, then the slow rise of that enormous head. Their eyes met. The lion stood, walked, stopped just shy of the barrier. Elias dropped to one knee as he had the first time. And Dakar mirrored him. The gasp from the observation booth was audible over the comms. Lisa's voice broke through. "He's matching the posture. Again, log it." Elias said nothing. The lion's gaze did not waver. This time, Dakar did not press his head forward. He didn't need to. The mimicry was enough. A gesture of mutual recognition, a ritual born of trust, not training. For 20 minutes they remained there, still, unmoving, until Dakar slowly turned, walked back to his feeding platform, and finally began to eat. The sanctuary exhaled. Later, in the conference room, Marquez closed his binder. "There's a growing body of evidence," he said slowly, suggesting that large predators may possess what we refer to in human terms as situational empathy. Not attachment in the domestic sense, but an awareness of relational dynamics. What we're seeing here may be the first live documentation of it, outside captivity or training conditions. Britta rubbed her temples. This could rewrite operational manuals across the board. Lisa nodded. And more importantly, it could save lives. If we understand how recognition works in lions, we might be able to improve rescue reintroductions, reduce aggression, increase post-trauma survival rates, which, the lawyer added carefully, might also justify extending experimental licenses and renewing federal grants. The room paused. Elias, seated quietly at the end of the table, said, "That's not why I'm here." Marquez smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but sometimes the things that change the world aren't where they're supposed to be. They're where people were brave enough to go without permission." As night fell, Elias returned to the observation post alone. Dakar lay curled in the shadows, head up, alert. Elias didn't kneel this time. He simply stood. And Dakar, in his way, acknowledged him, with a low, steady sound in the back of his throat. Not a roar, not a warning, just presence. And for Elias, it was enough. Outside the sanctuary, the world was changing. Media headlines now used words like breakthrough, empathy, interspecies awareness. Behavioral studies linked to the video were trending on academic search engines. Interest surged in conservation travel. Even insurance companies were adjusting their approach to wildlife-related liability and incorporating ethical AI assessments for on-site risk response. But none of that reached the man and the lion beneath the stars. In that space, nothing was monetized, nothing was explained, only felt. And that feeling, wordless, primal, unshakable, would carry them both into what came next. Dakar didn't just begin to eat again. He changed, not dramatically, not overnight, but subtly in a way that only those paying close attention could see. His pacing lessened. His aggression toward staff, though still present, seemed more measured, less reactive. He no longer flinched when the gate locks clanked or when humans passed too close. He watched, he listened, and when Elias appeared, even at a distance, his breathing slowed. In the observation records, Lisa marked a trend she hadn't expected: heart rate stabilization in the lion, lower cortisol levels based on samples, improved grooming, indicators perhaps of a lion no longer existing purely in fight or flight. She ran the numbers twice. The data was clear. Dakar wasn't recovering because of sedatives or routines. He was recovering because someone kept showing up. But it wasn't sustainable. The compound was a holding space, not a permanent enclosure, designed for transition, not long-term care. And Dakar's presence there was becoming a logistical strain. The sanctuary was receiving pressure from funders, from regional oversight boards, from private donors who loved a good story but demanded operational compliance. Some were pushing for release. Others whispered about transfer to a larger, better-funded facility overseas. None of them had seen what Elias saw, or what Dakar knew. Elias stood with Lisa that morning at the perimeter of the rehabilitation range, a vast fenced area of natural terrain on the edge of the preserve. It had been designed for short-term reintegration, semi-wild space for animals too fragile to survive in the open, but too strong to stay caged. A temporary home. Lisa glanced down at the clipboard in her hands. "We've cleared the zone. No other lions for 2 miles. Cameras are set. Observation tower staffed. Tranquilizer team in place." Elias looked at the gate. "And if he bolts?" Lisa shook her head. "He won't go far. He's still healing. And he doesn't want to run. You can feel that." The plan was simple. Dakar would be moved into the semi-wild zone for a 48-hour trial. No direct contact, no intervention unless necessary. Elias would be present, visibly but safely, inside a reinforced vehicle parked near the boundary. Nothing more. Just presence. At 10:03 a.m., the gate opened. Dakar stepped out, slow and deliberate, his body low and cautious. The sun cast his shadow long across the reddish soil. For a few seconds he froze, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Then he walked. Not toward the open brush or the shaded rocks, toward the vehicle. Elias sat inside, window cracked, watching through a reinforced pane. Dakar approached, stopping just 10 feet away. He didn't roar. He didn't growl. He sat and stared. Lisa's voice crackled through the radio. "He's choosing proximity. Log that?" From the tower, Marquez muttered, "This is beyond conditioning. This is relational memory." Inside the vehicle, Elias felt the weight of the moment press against his chest. Not fear, not awe. Something older, something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. The kind that came not from obligation, but from being seen. Dakar held his gaze for nearly a full minute, then turned, finally exploring the terrain. He sniffed at the rocks, marked a tree, rolled once in the dust before settling in a patch of grass beneath the lone acacia tree near the far fence. Elias didn't move. He stayed until sunset. That night, the sanctuary meeting room buzzed with voices. Rosa had uploaded new footage to a private conservation network. Lisa presented biometric readings. Marquez reviewed comparative behavior charts from other apex predator rehabilitation cases. But it was Elias who asked the question that stopped the room cold. "What happens to him if I leave?" Britta frowned. "You were never meant to stay this long." "I know. And we can't build a protocol around one man and one lion." "I'm not asking you to." Marquez closed his laptop. "But maybe it's time we ask a different question." Everyone turned. Marquez looked around the room, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. What if this connection isn't an outlier? What if it's an indicator of a cognitive model we've never validated because we never gave it space to emerge? "You want to study it?" Britta asked. "I want to document it, and then let it teach us what comes next." That evening, Elias walked the perimeter trail alone. The moon cast long shadows across the fencing. In the distance, he could just make out the shape of Dakar beneath the tree, head raised, eyes glinting faintly in the silver light. He thought about the systems he used to design: complex risk models for insurance underwriting, intelligent routing for predictive logistics. Everything built to reduce uncertainty, to account for failure before it happened. None of that applied here. No algorithm could have predicted this. No policy could have manufactured it. Some things, like trust, had to be offered freely and earned in return. When he reached the far corner of the path, he paused, looked out over the land, thought about his son, about the boy who had once drawn lions with human eyes, who believed in things no adult dared say out loud. What would Matthew have thought of Dakar? He smiled faintly. He would have understood, he whispered. Behind him, across the field, the lion's ears twitched. And somehow, Elias knew. Dakar had heard. The morning was colder than usual. The wind rolled in low from the desert flats, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and dusted acacia bloom. A stillness hung over the sanctuary like a held breath. Even the birds seemed quieter, the air expectant. Elias awoke before dawn. He'd barely slept, though not from nerves. It was something else, something weightless but pressing, the way you feel before an event you can't quite name. He dressed slowly, pulling on the same worn boots he had arrived in weeks ago, as though they'd walked him not just across continents, but through a life he had barely survived. He made his way to the command trailer at the edge of the preserve. Lisa was already inside, reviewing the tranquilizer dosages and adjusting the frequency settings for the observation drones. Marquez was nearby, poring over the motion data from the last 48 hours. Dakar had roamed the semi-wild space in predictable loops, but always returned to the southern ridge where Elias's presence had been most consistent. Lisa looked up. "Still time to change your mind." Elias shook his head. "He's not the one who's dangerous today." Outside, a crew moved with quiet urgency. A reinforced vehicle was being prepped with side panels retrofitted for transparent viewing. Cameras were embedded, audio isolated, GPS tagged. The operation was recorded not just for safety, but for science and for insurance. The sanctuary's board had demanded full oversight, not just of the lion, but of Elias. Their legal team had issued 3 waivers, all signed. Should anything go wrong, the sanctuary would not be held responsible. Neither would the Regional Conservation Authority. Elias was the only one assuming risk. He understood that. He preferred it that way. At 6:40 a.m., the transport team released Dakar into the wider boundary range. The lion moved with caution at first, ears up, body low to the ground. But within minutes, he relaxed, recognizing familiar terrain. He climbed the rocky slope of the ridge and scanned the open field below. The wind shifted, and then he paused. 50 meters away, the vehicle door opened. Elias stepped out. The radio in the control trailer crackled with protest. "He's outside. Repeat, subject is outside the vehicle. This violates protocol." But no one moved to stop him. Even Britta, watching from the tower, said nothing. Elias walked forward, not quickly, not recklessly. He moved like someone who had already accepted every possible outcome and wasn't trying to control any of them. Dakar watched him, still. Then, slowly, the lion descended the ridge. He didn't stalk. He approached, each step deliberate, calculated. The sun caught the mane around his shoulders, casting a gold halo through the morning dust. His breathing was visible now, slow puffs in the cold air. Elias stopped 20 feet away. They stood like that, 2 figures shaped by pain, shadowed by things they no longer needed to explain. There were no ropes, no commands, no tranquilizers, just a man and a lion, meeting again without certainty of how it would end. And then Dakar did the unthinkable. He lowered himself, not in fear, not in exhaustion, but in a slow mirrored gesture, knees folding, body easing into the same position Elias had taken days earlier behind the mesh barrier. It was the same posture, exact. Cameras clicked, scientists whispered. Lisa dropped her pen. Elias sank to the ground as well. Neither of them moved. A full minute passed. Then, almost gently, Dakar rose, patted the remaining distance, and extended his head forward, not in aggression, but in that same deliberate, impossibly tender motion he had shown once before. His forehead touched Elias's leg. No one breathed. A gesture, a moment, a memory. And then Dakar stepped back. Marquez's voice came through the comms, raw and low. "We've crossed the threshold. This is more than behavior. This is comprehension." Elias stood slowly, his legs unsteady, but not from fear. He turned toward the vehicle. Dakar watched him walk away, then turned in the opposite direction, padding softly into the brush. Later, inside the trailer, no one spoke. Rosa had captured everything: the gesture, the mirroring, the contact. Lisa had the biometric data, every heartbeat recorded. The board members, who had flown in just hours earlier, were silent. Elias removed his jacket and sat quietly in the corner, hands resting on his knees. Britta broke the silence. "So, what do we do now?" Marquez didn't look up. "We study, we listen, and we prepare to be wrong about everything we thought we knew." That evening, the video was reviewed in universities, conservation institutes, and corporate boardrooms alike. Insurance analysts questioned what this meant for predictive behavior models. Healthcare researchers drew parallels to trauma bonding and relational memory. Even in fields like real estate law and personal injury litigation, the clip raised conversations about liability when interaction exceeds expectation. The term relational sentience began trending, but for Elias it was never about the terms. It was about what his son had once said at 12 years old, sitting in a planetarium looking up at artificial stars. "Maybe we're not here to understand everything. Maybe we're just here to witness it." And now, in a land his son never lived to see, Elias had witnessed something no one could explain. And it had reached out and touched him back. The next morning, Dakar was gone. Not missing, just gone. Out of frame. Out of sight. He had slipped past the motion sensors in the early hours, disappearing into the northern stretch of the semi-wild range. The area wasn't fenced to keep him in, only to keep him close enough for observation. The sanctuary staff launched a soft perimeter scan, drones overhead, heat maps from the ridge, biometric pings sent through, collar tech calibrated to pick up muscle tremors. They found him just before noon. Lying beneath a thicket of shade, his body stretched long and still, not in distress, but in a kind of watchful peace, a kind of claim. He was home. Word had already spread beyond the sanctuary. Rosa's footage, now in its fifth cut, this one with narration and scientific annotation, had been picked up by a documentary distributor. The title was simple: The Lion Who Waited. Within 72 hours, it had crossed 10 million views across streaming platforms. Public curiosity turned into public conversation. Schools began using it in ethics classes. Psychology podcasts dissected the clip with terms like trauma imprinting and co-regulation in interspecies contact. Even investment firms, always watching for sentiment data that might forecast market trends, took notice. Companies linked to wildlife conservation, ecotourism, and ethical AI saw upticks in traffic. A healthcare tech startup even used a frame of Elias and Dakar in its campaign about emotional intelligence in caregiving algorithms. The phrase, "he waited," became an unlikely tagline, but back at the sanctuary, the attention was secondary. Dakar had entered a new phase. His movements were slower now, more deliberate. He no longer circled the boundaries obsessively. He began showing signs of territorial reinforcement, marking trees, scraping earth, engaging with natural stimuli. In time, he would be ready for monitored reintegration into the preserve's greater lion. Population! And yet, something still tethered him. Every time Elias appeared, whether on the ridge trail, or beside the vehicle station, or just beyond the fence, Dakar acknowledged him. A glance, a slow approach, a low, throaty chuff of recognition. It was never dramatic, never for show. It was simply there. A few days later, as Elias returned from his walk along the western path, he found Rosa sitting on the hood of her truck, reviewing photos. She looked up as he approached, then turned the tablet toward him. "You need to see this." It was a still image. Dakar, standing beside a kill, fresh, intact. Behind him, his pride. 3 younger lions, recently introduced, watched from a distance, but Dakar had not brought the meat to them. He had dragged it, carried it 50 yards, away from the others, toward the edge of the field, toward the fence line where Elias usually stood. In the photo, Dakar's body was angled slightly toward the camera, his gaze fixed on a spot, just beyond the frame. "He brought it here?" Elias asked. "Just after you left yesterday," Rosa said. "No signs of disturbance. He didn't eat it, didn't protect it, just placed it." Elias stared at the image, unable to speak. "Some people are calling it symbolic," she added. "A gesture. Others say we're romanticizing, that it's instinct gone strange." "What do you think?" he asked. She hesitated. "I think he was showing you something, that he's okay, that he remembers." The next morning, Elias stood at the fence line again. Dakar appeared from the brush not long after, his pace slow, powerful. He approached the same way he always did, without sound, without fear. He didn't stop this time. He walked the full length of the fence, circled once, and then lay down facing Elias, his head high, alert, but calm. This, Lisa had explained in one of her briefings, was known lion behavior when establishing social bonds. Mirroring, consistent. Eye contact, proximity without aggression. But there was something else in Dakar's posture that day. Something less quantifiable. He looked satisfied. Later, in a private session with the research team, Dr. Marquez addressed a small crowd of field biologists and cognitive scientists who had flown in to observe the phenomenon firsthand. He stood in front of a projection screen showing a freeze frame from the day of the encounter, the moment when Dakar had lowered himself to the ground, mirroring Elias exactly. "This image," he said, "isn't just about empathy. It's about awareness of another's presence, of matching not only behavior, but rhythm, time, breath. That's not just social cognition. That's intentionality." A hand went up in the back. A woman with a notepad asked, "But how do we measure it? How do we prove this isn't just chance?" Marquez smiled slightly. "Maybe we stop trying to prove it and start accepting that not everything meaningful fits into our measurement systems." The sanctuary's board, once skeptical, now found themselves hosting meetings with conservation donors, research universities, and media outlets. Interest turned into funding. Funding turned into expansion, and Dakar, once marked for relocation, was now the center of a new program, a test case in long-term interspecies behavioral study. Elias received a formal letter offering him an honorary role as a liaison advisor. The title meant little to him, but he accepted, not for recognition, but because he understood what Dakar had offered him and what it now demanded of him in return. Presence. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the brush turned to gold, Elias made his way to the overlook where he had first seen Dakar approach through the mesh. The area was quiet now. Fewer staff, fewer tourists, just the old rhythms of the land. He sat on a flat rock and waited. And after a time, Dakar emerged from the grass. He walked, not toward Elias, but to the center of the open field. He turned once, looked up, and let out a single, deep roar. Not loud, but long, it rolled across the savanna, through the fences, through the air, until it touched the place where Elias sat. And when the echo faded, Elias whispered, "I heard you." And somewhere, in a language older than science, the lion understood. 6 months passed. The air in Namibia had shifted again, the way it always did at the edge of a new season, cooler in the mornings, dustier in the afternoons. The golden hour, stretching wider, like time itself, had grown more generous. The sanctuary was quieter now. The journalists had moved on. The boardroom buzz had calmed, and the initial wave of global attention had settled into something else. Not a frenzy, not a fad, but a slow, steady pulse of respect. Dakar had integrated fully with his new pride. 3 females and a younger male had accepted his presence without contest. There had been tensions at first, brief displays of dominance, one minor injury, but the transition had been smoother than anyone predicted. Maybe it was time, maybe it was luck, or maybe it was something more. He had led a successful hunt 2 weeks ago. Rosa captured it from a distance, 5 minutes of raw motion that made its way into a new documentary funded by an education nonprofit specializing in empathy-based wildlife curriculum for high schools. The footage didn't focus on the kill, it focused on what came after. Dakar had stood apart from the rest of the pride. He dragged a portion of the meat 30 yards from the feeding ground and left it there. Then he walked away. It wasn't the first time. Elias hadn't returned to the inner compound in weeks, not because he wasn't allowed, but because something in him had shifted too. The moment on the field when Dakar had mirrored him, touched him, and then let him go. That had been enough. He now lived in a small home 2 kilometers outside the preserve. Simple, quiet. A place with wide windows, a desk facing the horizon, and a battered sketchbook that had once belonged to his son. He spent his days helping Lisa digitize years of old sanctuary notes for a new cloud-based conservation archive. The irony wasn't lost on him that after leaving an industry built on data science and enterprise analytics, he'd found himself scanning wildlife journals into a server labeled COSEMBA, Future Studies. One morning, Lisa called. "You should come in." "What's going on?" he asked. "I think he's waiting again." Elias drove in just before noon. He took the outer path, the one with the view across the southern ridge. The wind had picked up, tossing fine red sand across the scrub. Ahead, in the open grassland, Dakar stood alone, not resting, not moving, watching. Elias stopped beside the old observation post. It hadn't been used in months. He stepped out. He didn't wave, didn't speak. Dakar's head lifted slightly. For a moment, Elias stood still, unsure what he felt. This wasn't reunion. It wasn't ceremony. It was something else. Then Dakar walked forward, 10 paces, no more. He stood at a soft incline and stared out at the field below, where the rest of the pride lazed in the shade. He looked down at them, then back at Elias. And then he turned his body, not toward the pride, not toward Elias, but east, toward the boundary of the reserve, the far edge of the protected land. The message was clear. He was ready. Reintegration was complete. The programs had worked. The staff could confirm it. But for Elias, the confirmation came in that silent turn, in the quiet dignity of an animal who no longer needed proximity to be understood. Later that evening, Rosa joined Elias at his porch. She brought a thermos of coffee and a new tablet, loaded with the rough cut of her final video. Echoes of the wild. No narration, no music, just visuals, ambient sound, and the time-stamped moments that had sparked a worldwide conversation. People still ask me, she said, what that first moment felt like when he touched you, when he didn't kill you. Elias sipped his coffee. They ask me too. And what do you tell them? He looked out toward the dusk, where the last light broke along the edge of the preserve. I tell them the truth, which is that it wasn't a miracle. It was a decision on both sides. Rosa nodded. And they believe you? Most don't, he said, but some do, and that's enough. The sound of a lion's roar rolled across the valley just then, not urgent, not calling, just present. Alive. In the months that followed, the sanctuary developed a new initiative, the Recognition Project, a program designed to study interspecies behavioral awareness, focusing on nonverbal communication and memory in large predators. Universities partnered, funders committed. Even travel insurance agencies began to revise their language around human-animal interaction zones, offering new clauses rooted in empathy-based understanding. One of the most unexpected consequences was a collaboration between Lisa and a biotech firm focused on emotional AI, exploring how animal behavior could inform caregiving robots in senior health care. The idea was simple but profound, not to mimic compassion, but to recognize presence. Insurance technology newsletters picked up the story under headlines like, "When Wildlife Taught Machines to Stay." And Elias? He stayed on. He wasn't a scientist. He didn't lecture. But he walked the perimeter trails every few days, watched the horizon, listened. Sometimes Dakar appeared. Sometimes he didn't. But Elias didn't need to see him to know he was there. One day, months later, a student volunteer asked him the same question Rosa had. "Why do you think he didn't hurt you?" Elias looked at the boy, young, curious, the same age Matthew had been. He smiled gently. "Because I didn't go there to tame him," he said. "I went there to see if anything wild could still recognize pain in another body. And maybe offer something back." He turned toward the open land beyond the fence. And he did. As night fell over the sanctuary and the stars began to bloom across the darkened sky, Elias stood alone by the ridge. Somewhere in the brush, Dakar moved, unseen, unprovoked, but not forgotten. And the world, a little quieter now, held its breath in the space between understanding and awe, not waiting for proof, just listening